A priest approached a dying boy in the hospital. Minutes later, something happened that horrified everyone. The sterile corridors of St. Mary's Hospital in Boston echoed with the rhythmic beeping of medical equipment on a crisp autumn morning. Sarah Williams sat in the stark white consultation room, her fingers nervously intertwining as she waited for the test results. Her 8-year-old son, Tommy, had been experiencing unusual fatigue and unexplained bruising for weeks. What started as routine checkups had evolved into a battery of increasingly concerning tests. Dr. Elena Martinez, the hospital's leading pediatric oncologist, entered the room with a thick folder in her hands. The gravity in her eyes told Sarah everything before a single word was spoken. "Mrs. Williams," she began, her voice gentle but professional, "I'm afraid the test results show that Tommy has an aggressive form of acute lymphoblastic leukemia." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The room seemed to spin as Dr. Martinez continued explaining the diagnosis, using terms that blurred together: blast cells, bone marrow, rapid progression. Sarah's mind kept returning to Tommy in the pediatric ward, playing with his favorite superhero action figures, blissfully unaware of the battle that lay ahead. "I've already called your husband," Dr. Martinez added, noting Sarah's pale complexion. "He's on his way from work." John Williams arrived 20 minutes later, his tie askew and forehead beaded with sweat from rushing across town. The software engineer's usually analytical mind struggled to process the information as Dr. Martinez repeated the diagnosis. His hand found Sarah's, gripping it tightly. "The cancer is advancing rapidly," Dr. Martinez explained, pulling up digital scans on her tablet. "We need to begin aggressive treatment immediately. Every hour counts." While the parents grappled with the devastating news, a gentle knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Father Michael Thompson, St. Mary's resident chaplain, stood in the doorway. At 45 years old, his kind face and gentle demeanor had brought comfort to countless families within these walls. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said softly. "The nurses mentioned you might need someone to talk to." Sarah looked up, tears streaming down her face. "They say my baby has cancer, Father. Aggressive cancer." Her voice broke on the last words. Father Michael pulled up a chair, his presence bringing a sense of calm to the chaotic moment. "I know it's overwhelming," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "But you're not alone in this fight. St. Mary's has one of the best pediatric oncology teams in the country, and you have an entire community ready to support you." Dr. Martinez nodded in agreement. "Father Michael has been an invaluable part of our healing team," she added. "The emotional and spiritual support he provides often proves just as crucial as our medical interventions." As they discussed treatment options, Tommy's voice echoed from the hallway. A nurse had brought him down from the pediatric ward. "Mom? Dad?" he called out, his small frame appearing in the doorway. Despite the fatigue evident in his features, his bright blue eyes still sparkled with childlike curiosity. "Hey, buddy," John said, quickly wiping his eyes. "Come here." Tommy walked into the room, immediately noticing Father Michael. "Are you a superhero?" he asked, eyeing the priest's collar. "You're wearing a special uniform like Captain America." Father Michael smiled warmly. "Not quite a superhero, but I do try to help people. My name is Father Michael. Would you like to hear a story about real-life heroes?" Tommy nodded eagerly, climbing onto Sarah's lap. As Father Michael began telling an engaging tale about courage and hope, Dr. Martinez quietly discussed the treatment schedule with John. They would begin chemotherapy the next morning, followed by a series of targeted therapies. The hospital's research department was also investigating experimental treatments, should they become necessary. "The next few months will be challenging," Dr. Martinez warned. "But Tommy is young and strong. We'll fight this together." As the day progressed, more members of the hospital staff introduced themselves. Nurses, specialists, social workers. Each brought their own expertise and commitment to Tommy's care. Sarah noticed how Father Michael seemed to know everyone, facilitating introductions and helping the family navigate the overwhelming amount of information. Later that evening, as Tommy slept in his newly assigned room in the oncology ward, Sarah stood by the window, watching the Boston skyline fade into dusk. John had gone home to pack some essential items and inform their families. Father Michael appeared beside her, offering a cup of coffee. "I know it feels like your world is falling apart," he said quietly, "but I've witnessed countless miracles within these walls. Sometimes they're medical breakthroughs, sometimes they're moments of unexpected grace, but they happen." Sarah turned to him, studying his face. "Do you really believe that, Father? Or is it just something you tell parents like us?" "I believe it with all my heart," he replied, his eyes reflecting a deeper understanding. "And I'll be here every step of the way, no matter what happens." As night settled over Boston, Room 304 became a sacred space of hope and fear, medicine and faith, science and prayer. The monitors beeped steadily, marking time in their electronic rhythm. Tommy slept peacefully, unaware of the forces gathering to fight for his life. Dedicated medical professionals, loving parents, and a priest who would soon play a far more significant role than anyone could imagine. The first day ended with more questions than answers, but also with the assembly of a remarkable team united in their determination to save one small boy's life. As Father Michael left for the evening, he paused in the doorway watching Tommy sleep. Something stirred in his heart, a calling, a purpose, a destiny he couldn't yet understand, but would soon come to know all too well. The first rays of dawn crept through the windows of St. Mary's Hospital as Tommy Williams began his initial round of chemotherapy. The once energetic 8-year-old lay quietly in his bed in room 304, watching as nurses in blue scrubs connected clear bags of medicine to his IV line. Sarah sat beside him, attempting to maintain a brave smile while reading his favorite comic book about superheroes saving the world. "Mom," Tommy whispered, his voice already showing signs of fatigue. "Will this medicine make me strong like Captain America?" Sarah squeezed his small hand, fighting back tears. "It's special medicine, sweetheart, but it might make you feel tired for a while before it helps you get stronger." Nurse Grace Chen, who had quickly become their favorite member of the oncology team, adjusted the IV drip rate. "The medicine is like training for superheroes," she explained, her gentle voice carrying years of experience in pediatric care. "Sometimes heroes have to go through tough challenges to become stronger." As the first week progressed, the harsh reality of aggressive cancer treatment became apparent. Tommy's vibrant energy diminished rapidly, replaced by prolonged periods of nausea and exhaustion. His thick brown hair began falling out in clumps, leading to a tearful evening when John had to shave his son's head completely. "Look, buddy," John said, trying to keep his voice steady as he held up a mirror. "Now you look just like Professor X from X-Men. He's one of the most powerful superheroes, remember?" Tommy managed a weak smile, but his eyes revealed the fear and confusion that no 8-year-old should have to experience. The sight broke John's heart, causing him to excuse himself shortly after, where Sarah found him crying in the hospital corridor. Father Michael became a constant presence during these difficult days. He visited every morning and evening, bringing not only spiritual comfort, but also serving as a bridge between the medical staff and the increasingly overwhelmed parents. His ability to explain complex medical procedures in simple terms helped the family navigate the bewildering world of oncology protocols. During one particularly challenging evening, when Tommy's fever spiked dangerously high, Father Michael stayed well past his usual hours. He sat with Sarah while John paced the corridor outside, waiting for the latest blood test results. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, watching Tommy's restless sleep. "The doctors said the chemotherapy was our best chance, but he seems to be getting worse instead of better." Father Michael leaned forward, his voice low and comforting. "Sometimes the path to healing isn't straightforward. The treatment has to be aggressive because the cancer is aggressive. But I've been feeling something special about Tommy's case, Sarah, something I can't quite explain yet." Before he could elaborate, Dr. Martinez entered the room with John. Her expression was grave as she reviewed Tommy's latest test results. "The cancer cells aren't responding to the treatment as well as we'd hoped," she explained. "We need to consider more aggressive options." The second week brought even more challenges. Tommy's immune system, weakened by both the cancer and chemotherapy, left him vulnerable to infections. The boy, who once couldn't sit still, now spent most of his time sleeping, his skin pale and translucent under the harsh hospital lights. One afternoon, while Tommy was undergoing yet another round of tests, Father Michael found John in the hospital chapel, sitting alone in the dim light. "I'm losing my son," John said without turning around, his voice hollow. "All our savings, the best hospital in Boston, and I'm still losing him." Father Michael sat beside him, letting the silence stretch for a moment before speaking. "Faith isn't just about accepting what happens, John. Sometimes it's about fighting even when the odds seem impossible." "Faith?" John laughed bitterly. "I'm a software engineer, Father. I deal in logic, in code, in things I can control. But this," his voice broke, "I can't write a program to save my son." The priest's response was interrupted by an urgent call over the hospital intercom. "Code Blue, room 304. Code Blue." They ran to Tommy's room, finding it filled with medical staff. Tommy had suffered a seizure during a routine procedure, his small body convulsing on the bed while Sarah screamed his name. Dr. Martinez barked orders as nurses administered emergency medications. Father Michael found himself backing against the wall, overwhelmed by a strange sensation. The fluorescent lights above flickered briefly, and for a moment he thought he saw something, a shimmer in the air around Tommy's bed like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The crisis passed, but it marked a turning point. Dr. Martinez called a meeting with the family the next morning, her usual composed demeanor showing signs of strain. "The cancer is proving more resistant than we anticipated," she explained, showing them new scan results. "We've identified an experimental treatment protocol, but there are significant risks involved." As the doctors discussed survival rates and treatment options, Father Michael observed something that others missed. During moments when Tommy was awake, despite his deteriorating condition, there was an unusual clarity in his eyes. The boy would often stare at the priest with an expression that seemed far too knowing for his age. One evening, after most of the medical staff had left for the night, Tommy beckoned Father Michael closer to his bed. "I saw them," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Saw who, Tommy?" "The angels," the boy replied, his blue eyes intense despite his weakness. "They're waiting. They said someone has to make a choice." Father Michael felt a chill run down his spine, but before he could ask more, Tommy had drifted back to sleep. The priest stood in the darkened room, watching the monitors track the boy's weakening vital signs, and felt something stirring in his soul, a growing certainty that he was being called to play a role in this drama that went beyond anything he had imagined. As the second week drew to a close, the situation had become dire. Tommy's condition continued to deteriorate, and the experimental treatment remained their last hope. But as Father Michael left the hospital that night, he felt a growing conviction that there might be another way, one that would require a sacrifice he was only beginning to understand. The walls of St. Mary's Hospital Chapel stood silent, witness to Sarah Williams' growing despair. The once vibrant mother knelt before the altar, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs in the pre-dawn darkness. The past 2 weeks had stripped away her optimism, leaving behind a hollowed shell of uncertainty and fear. "Why?" she whispered into the empty chapel. "Why my son?" The sound of footsteps echoed softly behind her. Father Michael paused at the entrance, watching her internal struggle unfold. The past 21 days had taken their toll on everyone, but something in Sarah's demeanor this morning signaled a deeper crisis. "I used to believe," Sarah spoke without turning, her voice raw with emotion. "I believed in miracles, in the power of prayer. But watching my son waste away day after day," she finally turned to face the priest, her eyes red-rimmed and challenging. "Where is God in all this, Father?" Father Michael sat beside her, feeling the weight of his own doubts pressing against his chest. The strange visions he'd been experiencing, the shimmer of light around Tommy's bed, the boy's cryptic words about angels, had left him questioning everything he thought he knew about faith and divine intervention. "Sometimes," he began carefully, "faith isn't about understanding God's plan. It's about finding strength in the darkness." "Strength," Sarah laughed bitterly. "My 8-year-old son can barely lift his head from the pillow. The experimental treatment they're proposing could kill him faster than the cancer. Tell me, Father, where do I find strength in that?" Meanwhile, in the hospital's research wing, John Williams sat surrounded by medical journals and research papers. His engineer's mind refused to accept helplessness, driving him to search for answers in science. Dr. Martinez found him there, his desktop screen filled with clinical trial data and experimental treatment protocols. "Mr. Williams," she said gently, "you've been here all night again." John looked up, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "There has to be something we've missed. Some treatment, some combination of drugs that could help Tommy." Dr. Martinez sat across from him, her face showing the strain of her own professional struggles. "We're doing everything medically possible. The new protocol has a 20% survival rate," John interrupted. "I read the studies, 20%. My son has better odds of dying on the operating table than surviving the treatment." Back in room 304, Tommy stirred in his medical-induced sleep. The monitors beeped steadily, marking time in their electronic rhythm. Nurse Chen checked his vitals, her experienced eyes noting every slight change in his condition. "His blood pressure's dropping again," she murmured to the resident on duty. "We might need to adjust his medication." Father Michael made his way to Tommy's room after leaving Sarah in the chapel. The morning sun was beginning to stream through the windows, creating patterns on the sterile floor. As he approached Tommy's bed, That now familiar sensation washed over him, a slight distortion in the air like heat waves rippling through reality itself. "You feel it too, don't you?" Tommy's weak voice startled him. The boy's eyes were open, showing that unnatural clarity that seemed to peer straight into Father Michael's soul. "What do you mean, Tommy?" "The choice," Tommy whispered. "They're waiting for someone to make the choice." Before Father Michael could respond, Tommy's body began to convulse. Alarms blared as medical staff rushed into the room, pushing the priest aside. He watched helplessly as they worked to stabilize the boy, but something else caught his attention, his own reflection in the window. For a brief moment, he saw himself surrounded by the same ethereal light that he'd noticed around Tommy's bed. Later that evening, the hospital's ethics committee convened an emergency meeting. The experimental treatment protocol needed immediate approval if they were to proceed. Dr. Martinez presented the case, her professional demeanor masking her emotional investment in Tommy's fate. "The cancer is spreading faster than we anticipated," she explained to the assembled doctors. "Without intervention, he has days, maybe a week at most." In the hospital's small, non-denominational prayer room, Father Michael struggled with his own crisis of faith. The visions were becoming more frequent, accompanied by a growing sense of purpose he couldn't ignore. Yet doubt gnawed at him. Was he truly experiencing divine intervention? Or had the emotional strain of watching Tommy's decline affected his judgment? He opened his Bible, seeking guidance, but his eyes couldn't focus on the words. Instead, his mind kept returning to Tommy's cryptic messages about choices and waiting angels. As a priest, he'd counseled countless families through illness and loss, always finding the right words of comfort and hope. But now, faced with what he increasingly suspected was a divine calling, words failed him. The day ended with a somber family meeting in Dr. Martinez's office. Sarah and John sat close together, their hands clasped tightly as they listened to the doctor explain their options. "The ethics committee has approved the experimental protocol," Dr. Martinez said, "but you need to understand the risks. This treatment is extremely aggressive. There are no guarantees." Father Michael stood in the corner, observing the scene with growing certainty. As the parents grappled with their impossible decision, he felt something shift inside him, a clarity of purpose that transcended his earlier doubts. Sarah's voice brought him back to the present. "Father, what would you do if it was your child?" He met her desperate gaze, feeling the weight of divine purpose settling on his shoulders. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "healing comes in ways we don't expect, ways that challenge everything we think we know about faith and sacrifice." As night fell over Boston, the various players in this unfolding drama retreated to their separate corners. Sarah returned to the chapel, her crisis of faith unresolved but somehow different. John remained in the research wing, surrounded by medical data that offered no comfort. Dr. Martinez sat in her office, questioning whether science alone was enough to save her young patient. And Father Michael Thompson stood at the window of his small office, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The choice was becoming clearer with each passing hour, though its implications terrified him. Tomorrow, he would begin preparing for what he now knew he had to do, a sacrifice that would challenge the boundaries between faith and medicine, between life and death itself. In room 304, Tommy slept fitfully, surrounded by the soft glow that only Father Michael could see. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, counting down to a miracle that would soon shake the foundations of St. Mary's Hospital and change everyone's understanding of faith, love, and sacrifice forever. The dream came to Father Michael on a cold Boston night, 3 days before what doctors predicted would be Tommy's final week. In his sleep, the priest found himself standing in room 304, but the hospital had transformed. The walls glowed with an otherworldly light, and the air itself seemed charged with divine presence. Before him stood a figure of pure light, neither male nor female, its radiance almost too brilliant to behold. "Michael," it spoke, its voice resonating in his very soul, "the time has come to understand your purpose." The figure gestured toward Tommy's bed, where the boy lay suspended between life and death. Above him, threads of golden light intertwined with shadows of disease. "The gift of transference," the being continued, "has been granted to very few throughout history. Those who can take upon themselves the suffering of others." Father Michael awoke with a start, his heart pounding and his body drenched in sweat. The dream felt more real than any he'd ever experienced, and with it came a devastating clarity about his role in Tommy's fate. Dawn found him in St. Mary's Chapel, wrestling with the implications of his vision. The morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across the altar where he knelt. The weight of divine purpose pressed upon him like a physical burden. "You haven't slept," a voice observed. Dr. Martinez stood in the doorway, her white coat crisp despite the early hour. "Elena," he acknowledged, using her first name as he sometimes did in private. "How's Tommy?" She moved to sit beside him, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal exhaustion and worry. "His latest blood work shows the cancer is accelerating. Even with the experimental treatment." She left the sentence unfinished. Father Michael studied her face, wondering how to explain what he now knew. "Do you believe in miracles, Elena? Real ones, not just unexpected medical recoveries?" "I'm a scientist, Michael. I believe in what I can prove, what I can measure. And if something transcends measurement," he turned to face her fully, "if something challenges everything we think we know about the boundaries between life and death." Before she could respond, an urgent page echoed through the chapel. "Dr. Martinez to room 304, code yellow." They rushed to Tommy's room together, finding Sarah and John already there. Tommy had awakened from a fitful sleep, his blue eyes unnaturally bright despite his pallor. "The angels," he said as soon as Father Michael entered. "They showed you too, didn't they?" The room fell silent. Sarah looked between her son and the priest, sensing something significant passing between them. John stood rigid, his engineer's mind struggling to process his son's words. "Yes, Tommy," Father Michael replied softly. "They did." Dr. Martinez started to speak, likely to attribute Tommy's words to medication or delirium, but stopped as the lights in the room began to flicker. The same ethereal shimmer that Father Michael had been seeing for weeks became visible to everyone for a brief moment. "What was that?" John demanded, his voice sharp with fear and confusion. Father Michael felt the weight of divine purpose settling more firmly on his shoulders. "It's a sign," he said quietly, "of what needs to be done." Later that afternoon, he sat alone with Tommy while his parents met with Dr. Martinez about adjusting his pain medication. The boy seemed stronger than he had in days, though Father Michael now understood why. "They're preparing you," Tommy said matter-of-factly. "It hurts them that it has to be this way, but they say it's how it works." "Who says that, Tommy?" "The angels. They say someone has to choose to take it away. That's why they picked you." Tommy's eyes met his with that unsettling wisdom. "Because you already give yourself to help people." Father Michael felt a chill run down his spine. "How long have you been seeing them?" "Since I got sick. They said they had to wait for the right person to be ready." Tommy's voice grew weaker. "They say it will hurt you instead of me." The priest closed his eyes, remembering his dream, the gift of transference, the ability to take another's suffering upon oneself. Throughout history, there had been whispered stories of such occurrences, always dismissed by the church as legend or metaphor. That evening, Father Michael retreated to his office to write several letters. One to his sister in Chicago, one to his superior in the diocese, and one to Sarah and John. He couldn't explain everything. How could he put divine intervention into words that wouldn't sound like madness? But he could leave them something to hold on to after what was to come. As midnight approached, he made his way back to Tommy's room. The night shift nurse nodded to him, used to his irregular visits. Standing by the window, he watched Boston's skyline glitter in the darkness. "You've made your decision," a voice said behind him. He turned to find Nurse Chen, but something in her eyes told him she was more than she appeared. "You're one of them," he said, not really surprised. She smiled, her form seeming to shimmer slightly. "We can only guide. The choice must be human, and it must be freely made. Will it save him? Yes, but the cost will be exactly as it appears. A life for a life, suffering for suffering. There is no escaping the balance." Father Michael nodded, feeling a strange peace settle over him. "When?" "Tomorrow, during the evening prayer. The parents must be present. They need to witness, even if they don't understand." After she left, Father Michael spent the remainder of the night in prayer. He thought about his life, his calling to the priesthood, and all the moments that had led him to this choice. By the time dawn broke over Boston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, he was ready. He had one last visit to make before setting events in motion. Dr. Martinez was already in her office when he knocked. "Elena," he said, "I need you to promise me something. Whatever happens tonight, whatever you see, let it happen. Don't try to stop it." She looked up from her computer, studying his face. "Michael, what are you planning? Just promise me, please, for Tommy's sake." Something in his expression must have convinced her. "I promise," she said slowly. "But Michael," he smiled gently, "sometimes faith and science meet in ways we never expected, Elena. Remember that." As he walked back through the hospital corridors, Father Michael could feel the weight of destiny upon him. In less than 24 hours, everything would change. A miracle would occur in room 304, but unlike the stories of divine intervention that filled religious texts, this one would come with a price that could be measured in blood cells and medical charts. He was ready. Dawn broke over St. Mary's Hospital with an unusual stillness. Father Michael Thompson rose from his small cot in the hospital chaplain's office, where he had spent the night in prayer and contemplation. The weight of his impending sacrifice pressed heavily upon him, yet he felt an inexplicable sense of peace. He began his morning routine with deliberate care, each action carrying new significance. As he fastened his collar, he caught his reflection in the window. He looked older somehow, as if the knowledge of what was to come had aged him overnight. The ethereal glow he had seen in his vision lingered at the edges of his perception, a constant reminder of his divine calling. In room 304, Tommy Williams lay sleeping, his breath shallow but steady. Sarah sat in her usual chair, dark circles under her eyes betraying another sleepless night. John paced by the window, his face drawn with worry, as he spoke quietly on his phone with their insurance company about the experimental treatment that now seemed pointless. "Father Michael," Sarah greeted him softly as he entered. "You're here early." "I wanted to spend some time with Tommy," he replied, noting how the shimmer in the air intensified as he approached the bed. "And with both of you." Tommy stirred, his eyes opening with that unsettling clarity that had become more pronounced in recent days. "It's today," he whispered, looking directly at Father Michael. "Isn't it?" The priest nodded almost imperceptibly. John ended his call, moving closer to his son's bed. "What's today, buddy?" "The angels are getting ready," Tommy said simply, causing his parents to exchange worried glances. Father Michael spent the morning making his final preparations. He visited each of his regular patients, offering words of comfort and guidance that felt like farewells. In the pediatric ward, he distributed small crosses he had blessed, paying special attention to the children fighting their own battles against various illnesses. Around noon, he met with Dr. Martinez in her office. She looked up from Tommy's latest test results, her professional mask slipping to reveal deep concern. "His numbers are worse," she said without preamble. "The experimental treatment won't be necessary," Father Michael interrupted gently. "Elena, do you remember what you promised me?" She studied his face intently. "Michael, whatever you're planning, just remember your promise," he said, standing to leave, "and be ready in room 304 this evening. What happens there will challenge everything you believe about medicine and faith." Throughout the afternoon, Father Michael wrote his final letters. To his sister Margaret in Chicago, he explained as much as he could about his decision without revealing the divine intervention that had led to it. To his superior in the diocese, he provided a more detailed account, knowing it would be needed when the church investigated the events that would unfold. The most difficult letter was to Sarah and John. How could he explain that he had been chosen to take their son's suffering upon himself, that the miracle they had prayed for would come at the cost of his own life? In the end, he focused on the power of sacrificial love and the mysteries of divine grace. As evening approached, an unusual atmosphere settled over the hospital's 4th floor. Nurses reported equipment behaving strangely, lights flickering without explanation. Nurse Chen, or the angel wearing her form, appeared briefly to confirm that everything was in place. "The transition must begin during evening prayers," she instructed. "The process cannot be interrupted once it starts." Father Michael changed into fresh vestments, each movement deliberate and sacred. He tucked a small vial of holy water into his pocket and took his well-worn Bible from his desk. Before leaving his office for the last time, he knelt in prayer, offering himself fully to what was to come. In room 304, the Williams family waited. Dr. Martinez stood near the door, having cleared her evening schedule as requested. The monitors beeped steadily, marking Tommy's weakening vital signs. "Sarah, John," Father Michael said as he entered, his voice carrying a new authority, "I need you to trust what will happen here tonight. No matter what you see, no matter what you don't understand, promise me you'll let it unfold." They looked at him uncertainly but nodded, drawn in by the intensity of his presence. Tommy watched with knowing eyes, already aware of what was to come. Father Michael began the evening prayers, his voice strong and clear in the quiet room. As he spoke the ancient words, the air began to thicken with that now familiar shimmer. The fluorescent lights flickered and dimmed, casting the room in an otherworldly glow. "The angels are here," Tommy whispered, his voice carrying clearly despite its weakness. "Doctor," Martinez moved forward instinctively but stopped as Father Michael raised his hand. The priest continued praying, switching from English to Latin, words of power that seemed to resonate with the very air around them. As the final prayer approached, Father Michael met Tommy's eyes one last time. The boy smiled, a genuine expression of peace and understanding that seemed far beyond his 8 years. "Thank you," Tommy said softly. Father Michael placed his hand on Tommy's forehead, feeling the divine presence surge around them. In that moment, everything he had learned about faith, sacrifice, and love crystallized into a single purpose. He was ready to give his life for this child, to take upon himself the suffering that was destroying Tommy's young body. As he began the final prayer, Father Michael Thompson made his choice freely and completely, embracing the miracle and its terrible cost. The power of sacrificial love, first demonstrated 2,000 years ago on a cross, was about to manifest again in room 304 of St. Mary's Hospital. The light grew stronger, and Father Michael felt the first stirrings of what was to come. In these final moments, he thought not of himself, but of Tommy, of Sarah and John, of all those whose lives would be touched by what was about to happen. "In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti," he intoned, and with those words, he stepped fully into his destiny. The evening of January 31st brought an otherworldly stillness to room 304 of St. Mary's Hospital. As Father Michael Thompson began the final prayer, the fluorescent lights above started to flicker with increasing intensity. The medical equipment surrounding Tommy's bed emitted strange, discordant beeps, their digital displays fluctuating wildly. "In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti," Father Michael's voice resonated with supernatural authority, each word seeming to vibrate in the very air around them. His hand, still resting on Tommy's forehead, began to emit a soft, ethereal glow that gradually intensified. Dr. Elena Martinez stood transfixed, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. The monitors tracking Tommy's vital signs began displaying impossible readings: heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen levels, all simultaneously spiking and plummeting in patterns that defied medical explanation. Sarah and John Williams clutched each other's hands, their faces illuminated by the increasingly brilliant light emanating from where Father Michael touched their son. The air in the room grew thick with an electric tension, making it difficult to breathe. "The angels," Tommy whispered, his voice carrying clearly despite its weakness. "They're all around us now." The light surrounding Father Michael and Tommy grew blindingly bright, forcing everyone in the room to shield their eyes. Through the gaps between their fingers, they could see Father Michael's form beginning to change. His back arched in pain, his face contorting as the first waves of transference began. "Don't interfere," Nurse Chen commanded, as Dr. Martinez instinctively moved forward. The nurse's voice carried an otherworldly authority that stopped the doctor in her tracks. "What begins now must be completed." A high-pitched whine filled the room as every electronic device seemed to reach a crescendo of malfunction. The light coalesced into visible streams of energy flowing between Father Michael and Tommy, taking on colors that had no names in any human language. Father Michael's voice, now strained with agony, continued the ancient prayer. As the words left his lips, his skin began to pale, taking on the sickly pallor that had characterized Tommy's appearance for weeks. Simultaneously, color began returning to Tommy's cheeks, his breathing becoming stronger and more regular. "Oh my God!" Sarah gasped, watching as her son's vital signs began to stabilize and strengthen on the monitors that still functioned. Tommy's eyes opened wider, showing more alertness than he had in weeks, but as Tommy grew stronger, Father Michael's condition deteriorated rapidly. The priest's body trembled with the effort of remaining upright, his face contorting in pain as the cancer cells began their savage migration from Tommy's body to his own. The transformation was visible even to the naked eye. While Tommy's skin cleared and gained color, dark bruises began appearing on Father Michael's exposed skin. "The transfer must be complete," Nurse Chen announced, her form beginning to shimmer with its own divine light. "There can be no halfway point, no partial healing. What is given must be fully given." John Williams, the engineer who had always relied on logic and reason, found himself witnessing something that shattered his understanding of reality. The medical equipment in the room, despite its erratic behavior, was recording everything, providing irrefutable evidence that what they were witnessing was real, not mass hysteria or shared delusion. Dr. Martinez watched in professionally horrified fascination as her patient's vital signs miraculously improved, while Father Michael's deteriorated in exactly the same pattern. It was as if the disease itself was being physically transferred from one body to another, defying everything she knew about medical science. Tommy sat up in bed for the first time in weeks, his eyes fixed on Father Michael with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," he whispered, understanding more fully than anyone else in the room the magnitude of the sacrifice being made. The light reached its peak intensity, and Father Michael's prayer rose to a crescendo. With a final surge of energy that shook the entire room, the transfer completed itself. The priest collapsed to the floor, his body racked with the full force of the aggressive cancer that had been killing Tommy moments before. As the supernatural light began to fade, the hospital's emergency systems kicked in. Backup generators hummed to life, restoring normal power to the room. Dr. Martinez rushed to Father Michael's side, her training taking over despite her shock at what she had witnessed. "Get a trauma team in here now," she shouted, checking the priest's vital signs. His pulse was weak and erratic, his breathing shallow. His skin was hot to the touch, showing all the symptoms that Tommy had exhibited at his worst. Meanwhile, Tommy jumped out of bed, his movements strong and sure. "Mom, Dad!" he exclaimed, embracing his stunned parents. His voice was clear and energetic, bearing no trace of the weakness that had plagued him for months. The room erupted into chaos as medical staff responded to the emergency call. They found themselves dealing with two patients in drastically different conditions, one miraculously cured, the other suddenly fighting for his life with advanced stage leukemia. Through it all, Nurse Chen stood quietly in the corner, her form becoming increasingly transparent. As the medical team worked to stabilize Father Michael, she caught Dr. Martinez's eye one last time. "What you have witnessed here is sacred," she said, her voice carrying the weight of divine authority. "The power of sacrificial love is beyond human understanding, but its effects are very real. Remember that." With those words, she vanished completely, leaving behind a room full of people grappling with a miracle that would challenge their understanding of reality forever. The monitors attached to Tommy now showed perfectly normal readings for a healthy 8-year-old boy, while new equipment being attached to Father Michael displayed the dire numbers that had been Tommy's just moments before. As the night deepened over Boston, news of what had occurred in room 304 began to spread through the hospital. Medical staff gathered in hushed groups, discussing the impossible event that had been recorded on multiple devices. Security cameras had captured the supernatural light, while medical equipment had documented the inexplicable transfer of disease from one body to another. In the midst of the commotion, Tommy sat with his parents, his miraculous recovery already being documented by amazed medical staff. But his eyes kept returning to Father Michael, understanding in a way that others couldn't the true magnitude of what had just occurred. The miracle in room 304 would soon become one of the most thoroughly documented cases of inexplicable healing in modern medical history. But for those who witnessed it firsthand, it would forever remain a testament to the power of sacrificial love and the reality of divine intervention in the modern world. In the hours following the miraculous events in room 304, St. Mary's Hospital transformed into a maelstrom of activity. Father Michael Thompson lay in intensive care, his body ravaged by the aggressive leukemia he had taken from Tommy Williams. The monitoring equipment around his bed displayed the same dire readings that had been Tommy's just hours before. Dr. Elena Martinez hadn't left Father Michael's side since his collapse. Her trained hands moved with practiced efficiency as she examined him, but her mind struggled to reconcile what she had witnessed with her medical training. The blood work confirmed what seemed impossible. The genetic markers of Tommy's specific cancer were now present in Father Michael's cells. "His condition is critical," she explained to the hospital administrator, Dr. James Collins, who had been summoned immediately after the incident. "The disease appears identical to Tommy's case, down to the molecular level. It's as if the cancer literally transferred from one body to another." In the pediatric ward, Tommy underwent a battery of tests, each one confirming his miraculous recovery. His blood work showed no trace of cancer, his organs were functioning normally, and his energy had returned in full force. The 8-year-old boy, who had been at death's door just hours ago, was now sitting up in bed, devouring his first proper meal in weeks. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered to John as they watched their son chatting animatedly with the nurses. "How is this possible?" John, the engineer who had always relied on logic and data, stood silent. The security footage from room 304 played on endless loop in his mind, the supernatural light, the visible transfer of energy, the impossible readings on the medical equipment. All of it had been recorded, leaving no room for dismissal as mass hysteria or collective imagination. By morning, news of the event had spread throughout the hospital. Medical staff gathered in small groups, discussing what they had witnessed or heard. The night shift nurses who had been present during the miracle were besieged with questions, but they could only shake their heads in wonder. Hospital security had to be increased, as word leaked to the local media. Reporters gathered outside, their satellite vans creating a small village in the parking lot. Dr. Collins issued a brief statement asking for privacy and respect for the patients involved, but the story was already spreading like wildfire. On the second day, Vatican officials arrived. They moved through the hospital with quiet authority, interviewing witnesses and gathering evidence. The church had procedures for investigating potential miracles, but this case was unprecedented. The physical transfer of disease, witnessed by medical professionals and recorded on multiple devices, defied traditional categories of divine intervention. Tommy's recovery continued to astound the medical staff. Dr. Martinez ordered every conceivable test, documenting everything for what she knew would become a landmark case in medical literature. "It's not just remission," she explained to her colleagues. "There's no trace the cancer was ever present in his system. It's as if he was never sick." But while Tommy thrived, Father Michael's condition deteriorated rapidly. The cancer that had nearly claimed Tommy's life now ravaged the priest's body with frightening speed. The medical team fought to stabilize him, but they were essentially starting from where they had left off with Tommy, facing an aggressive disease that had already progressed too far. Sarah spent hours sitting with Father Michael, reading to him from his own Bible as he drifted in and out of consciousness. The guilt she felt at her son's miracle coming at such a cost warred with her profound gratitude. "Why did you do it?" she asked during one of his brief moments of lucidity. "Love is always a choice," he managed to whisper, his voice weak but his eyes clear. "He has his whole life ahead of him." John struggled with his own response to the miracle. His scientific mindset had been shattered, forcing him to confront realities that existed beyond the realm of physics and data. He found himself returning to the hospital chapel, sitting in silence as he grappled with questions of faith and sacrifice. On the third day, the first medical paper was drafted. Dr. Martinez worked with a team of specialists to document every aspect of what they were calling the transference event. They knew their findings would be scrutinized by the scientific community, so they focused on the empirical evidence: blood work, genetic analysis, recorded data from medical equipment, and security footage. The Vatican investigators interviewed Tommy, who spoke with surprising clarity about his experience. "The angels were there all along," he explained. "They said someone had to choose to take it away, and Father Michael was chosen because he already gave his life to help people." Meanwhile, Father Michael's sister, Margaret, arrived from Chicago. She sat by her brother's bedside, holding his hand as he battled the disease he had willingly taken upon himself. The siblings had always been close, and she alone seemed unsurprised by his sacrifice. "He's always been like this," she told Sarah quietly. "Even as a child, he would give away his food if someone else was hungry, take punishment for others' mistakes. This is who he is, who he's always been." As the third day drew to a close, the hospital settled into an uneasy routine. Security guards patrolled the corridors, keeping curious onlookers and persistent reporters at bay. Medical staff continued their rounds, trying to maintain professional distance despite their personal involvement in the unfolding miracle. But in room 304, now occupied by Father Michael, the monitoring equipment told the story of a battle being lost. The cancer that had nearly claimed Tommy's life was now consuming the priest with devastating efficiency. Dr. Martinez and her team worked tirelessly, but they could see the trajectory of his decline. Tommy insisted on visiting Father Michael, understanding more than anyone else the sacrifice that had been made. Standing beside the priest's bed, the boy who had been miraculously healed placed his small hand over Father Michael's. "The angels say you'll be with them soon," Tommy said softly. "They say you'll be one of them because of what you did for me." As night fell over Boston, the hospital lights cast long shadows in the corridors. The miracle of room 304 had shaken the foundations of faith and science, leaving those who witnessed it forever changed. But for Father Michael Thompson, it had been simply a choice, a decision to embrace the ultimate expression of sacrificial love. The story was far from over, but its central truth was already clear. In an age of scientific certainty and religious skepticism, a miracle had occurred that would challenge both. The question now was how the world would respond to the undeniable evidence of divine intervention in the modern era. St. Mary's Hospital transformed into the epicenter of an unprecedented investigation that drew experts from both scientific and religious fields. The Vatican's official investigation team, led by Father Antonio Rossi, a seasoned investigator of miraculous claims, set up a temporary office in the hospital's administrative wing. The evidence must be examined with complete objectivity, Father Rossi declared during the first formal meeting. We seek truth, whether it confirms or challenges our understanding of divine intervention. Dr. Elena Martinez presented the medical evidence to a panel of distinguished oncologists who had flown in from around the world. The data was irrefutable. Tommy Williams' aggressive leukemia had vanished completely, while Father Michael Thompson now exhibited the exact same cancer, down to its genetic markers. The transfer appears to have been absolute, Dr. Martinez explained, pointing to microscopic images of the cells. It's not merely similar cancer, it's identical, as if the disease itself was transported from one body to another. Security footage from room 304 became the subject of intense scrutiny. Technical experts analyzed the video frame by frame, documenting the supernatural light and energy transfer. The hospital's equipment readings during the event were equally baffling, showing simultaneous improvement in Tommy's condition and deterioration in Father Michael's. Sarah and John Williams found themselves at the center of a media storm. Reporters camped outside their home, desperate for interviews about what the press had dubbed the miracle of St. Mary's. The family retreated to a private room in the hospital, where Tommy continued to undergo regular tests, confirming his complete recovery. He's not just in remission, Dr. Martinez reported to the investigation team. There's no evidence he ever had cancer. Even the typical cellular markers of past chemotherapy are absent. It's as if his entire medical history was erased and rewritten. The scientific community struggled to reconcile the evidence with established medical knowledge. Dr. James Collins, the hospital administrator, faced mounting pressure from medical boards and research institutions demanding explanations. We're dealing with something that defies current scientific understanding, he admitted during a closed-door meeting. The documentation is flawless, the witnesses are credible, and the physical evidence is undeniable. Father Michael, growing weaker by the day, provided a detailed written testimony when his condition allowed. His account of the divine visions and the choice he made added another layer to the investigation. The Vatican team paid particular attention to his description of the angels and their role in the miracle. The theological implications are staggering, Father Rossi noted. This goes beyond traditional healing miracles. We're seeing a documented case of vicarious suffering with physical manifestation. By the end of the first week of investigation, several key findings emerged. First, the medical evidence conclusively proved that Tommy's cancer had completely vanished while appearing simultaneously in Father Michael's body. The genetic matching was perfect, eliminating any possibility of coincidence. Second, multiple independent witnesses, including medical professionals, had observed the supernatural phenomena during the transfer. Their accounts were consistent and supported by video evidence. Third, the hospital's equipment had recorded data that violated known laws of medical science. The simultaneous transfer of disease between bodies had no precedent in medical literature. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Nurse Chen's role came under scrutiny. Security footage showed her presence during critical moments, but she had vanished after the miracle. Hospital records contained her employment file, but attempts to contact her proved futile. It's as if she never existed outside of these events, a Vatican investigator remarked. Yet multiple witnesses interacted with her, and she appears clearly in the footage. Tommy's testimony about the angels became increasingly significant as the investigation progressed. His detailed descriptions of their communications matched elements of Father Michael's written account, despite the two never having discussed these details. The angels said it had to be his choice, Tommy explained to Father Rossi. They couldn't make him do it. That's why they had to wait for the right person. The medical investigation expanded to include genetic research as scientists attempted to understand the mechanism of disease transfer. Blood samples from both Tommy and Father Michael became the subject of intense study in laboratories across the globe. Dr. Martinez worked tirelessly, documenting every aspect of both cases. Her research paper, still in draft form, already promised to be one of the most significant medical documents of the century. She knew her findings would be scrutinized by skeptics, but the evidence supported every claim. As the week progressed, the investigation faced a growing sense of urgency. Father Michael's condition continued to deteriorate, making it clear that time was running out to gather his testimony. His sister Margaret helped fill in details about his character and history, painting a picture of a man whose final sacrifice aligned perfectly with a lifetime of service to others. The media frenzy intensified as preliminary findings began to leak. Major news networks ran continuous coverage of the story, while religious leaders and scientific experts debated its implications on daily talk shows. By day 40, the investigation had compiled thousands of pages of documentation, hours of video footage, and countless medical records. The evidence pointed to one inescapable conclusion: a genuine miracle had occurred in room 304 of St. Mary's Hospital. Father Rossi prepared his preliminary report for the Vatican, knowing it would trigger intense debate within the Church. The scientific team, led by Dr. Martinez, finalized their medical documentation, ready to submit their findings to peer-reviewed journals. The investigation had answered many questions, but raised even more. As the teams prepared their final reports, they knew they were documenting something that would challenge both religious and scientific worldviews for years to come. What happened in room 304 would forever change how the world viewed the intersection of faith and science, forcing both believers and skeptics to confront the reality of divine intervention in the modern age. The transformation that occurred during these crucial 10 days at St. Mary's Hospital unfolded like a tapestry of miracles and heartbreak. Tommy Williams flourished, his recovery defying every medical precedent, while Father Michael Thompson's condition deteriorated with the same aggressive speed that had characterized Tommy's original illness. In the pediatric ward, Tommy's presence became a beacon of hope. His room, once filled with the somber beeping of medical equipment, now echoed with laughter. Children from other rooms would visit, drawn to his inexplicable energy and the story of his miracle. He spoke to them with wisdom beyond his years, sharing tales of angels and the priest who had saved his life. The angels said that love is the strongest medicine, he told a young girl battling her own cancer. And Father Michael had enough love to take all my sickness away. Sarah and John watched their son's transformation with a mixture of joy and guilt. The weight of Father Michael's sacrifice hung heavy on their hearts. Sarah spent hours in the hospital chapel, wrestling with emotions she couldn't fully express. "How do you thank someone for dying in your child's place?" she asked Dr. Martinez one evening. What words could possibly be enough? The medical team documented every aspect of both cases. Tommy's recovery continued to astound them. Not only had the cancer vanished, but his body showed no signs of the aggressive chemotherapy he had endured. It was as if his entire medical history had been erased and rewritten. Father Michael's decline, however, progressed with devastating efficiency. The cancer that had taken root in his body seemed to move even faster than it had in Tommy's case. Dr. Martinez hypothesized that the transfer had somehow accelerated the disease's progression. "It's consuming him at nearly twice the rate we observed in Tommy," she explained to the research team, as if the disease itself gained momentum during the transfer. On day 45, Father Michael experienced a brief rally. During a moment of clarity, he asked to speak with Tommy alone. The hospital staff reluctantly agreed, monitoring the meeting through the room's observation window. "The angels say you're almost ready," Tommy said, holding the priest's hand. "They're preparing a place for you." Father Michael smiled weakly. "Are they still here with us, Tommy?" "Always, they never left. They say what you did will help people believe in miracles again." The conversation was recorded as part of the ongoing investigation, adding another layer to the growing documentation of supernatural events surrounding the case. The Vatican team paid particular attention to Tommy's continued interactions with the angels, noting how his accounts remained consistent with his earlier testimony. By day 47, the media attention had reached a fever pitch. Major news networks maintained round-the-clock coverage outside the hospital. Religious pilgrims began gathering in the parking lot, holding vigils and praying for Father Michael. The scientific community's response evolved from skepticism to cautious acknowledgement that something unprecedented had occurred. Prestigious medical journals fast-tracked papers about the case, while research institutions worldwide requested access to the medical data. Dr. Martinez completed her comprehensive report, documenting every aspect of what she now called cellular transference. Her findings would later become the foundation for a new field of study, bridging the gap between spiritual healing and medical science. On day 49, Father Michael's vital signs began to fail. The medical team worked tirelessly, but they knew they were witnessing the final stages of his sacrifice. His sister Margaret hadn't left his side for days, reading from his favorite passages of scripture. The hospital itself seemed to hold its breath. Staff members who had witnessed the original miracle spoke in hushed tones about strange phenomena, flickering lights, unexplained equipment readings, and a persistent ethereal glow around Father Michael's room that only some could see. Tommy became increasingly agitated, insisting that the angels were gathering. "They're coming to take him home," he told his parents. "They say he'll become one of them because he loved so much." On the evening of day 50, the monitors in Father Michael's room began to register unusual patterns. The same ethereal light that had appeared during the original miracle manifested again, though softer this time. Medical staff and Vatican investigators rushed to document everything. Father Michael opened his eyes one last time, looking at something no one else could see. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Perfect love." The room filled with a peace that witnesses would later struggle to describe. As Father Michael took his final breath, the machines recorded readings that defied medical explanation. The light that had surrounded him seemed to pulse once, then fade away, leaving behind a profound silence. Tommy, in his room down the hall, smiled through his tears. "The angels took him," he said simply. "He's with them now." The transformation was complete. A dying boy had been restored to perfect health, while a priest who had chosen to take his place completed his journey of sacrificial love. The events at St. Mary's Hospital would be studied for years to come, challenging both faith and science to expand their understanding of what was possible. In the days that followed, thousands would visit St. Mary's, seeking answers to their own questions about faith, love, and sacrifice. But for those who had witnessed the transformation firsthand, the answer was clear. They had seen the power of divine love manifest in the modern world, changing forever how they understood the intersection of the miraculous and the medical. Sarah and John Williams took their healthy son home, knowing their lives would never be the same. Tommy continued to see angels, though he said they visited less frequently now. His experience had transformed him into a living testament to the reality of miracles and the power of sacrificial love. The transformation that began in room 304 rippled outward, touching countless lives and challenging the world to reconsider its understanding of faith, science, and the mysterious ways they intersect in the human experience. 1 year after the miraculous events at St. Mary's Hospital, Boston's skyline glowed golden in the autumn sunset. Room 304 had become a site of pilgrimage, drawing visitors from around the world seeking to understand the profound legacy of Father Michael Thompson's sacrifice. Dr. Elena Martinez stood at the podium of the International Medical Conference in Geneva, presenting her comprehensive study of what became known as the Thompson case. Her research, published in leading medical journals, had sparked a revolution in how science approached the intersection of faith and healing. The documented transfer of disease from one body to another challenges everything we thought we knew about the nature of illness, she explained to the assembled physicians. The genetic markers, the cellular evidence, the recorded data, all point to something that transcends our current understanding of medical science. In the Vatican, Father Michael's case had been officially recognized as miraculous after extensive investigation. Father Rossi's final report spanned thousands of pages, including testimony from hundreds of witnesses and experts. The Church established a special commission to study the implications of physical disease transfer as a form of divine intervention. Tommy Williams, now 9 years old, had become an inadvertent symbol of hope for countless families battling childhood illness. His story and the sacrifice that saved his life inspired a worldwide conversation about the nature of love and healing. "The angels still visit sometimes," he told his mother one evening as they sat in their backyard. "They say Father Michael helps them now, watching over other sick children." Sarah and John Williams had established the Thompson Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of children with terminal illnesses. The foundation worked closely with St. Mary's Hospital, where a new wing had been named in Father Michael's honor. "His sacrifice changed more than just our family," John reflected during the wing's dedication ceremony. "It changed how we understand the relationship between faith and medicine." Margaret Thompson, Father Michael's sister, had become an advocate for integrating spiritual care into medical treatment. Her brother's letters, published with Vatican approval, provided insight into his journey toward ultimate sacrifice. "Michael always understood that love was more than an emotion," she shared during an interview. "He saw it as a force capable of transforming reality itself." The medical community's response to the Thompson case evolved from initial skepticism to serious scientific inquiry. Research centers worldwide began studying the possibility of energy transfer between patients, though none could replicate the miraculous event that occurred in room 304. Dr. James Collins, St. Mary's Hospital administrator, implemented new protocols for documenting unexplained phenomena in medical settings. Father Michael's sacrifice taught us that there are aspects of healing that extend beyond traditional medicine, he explained. Nurse Chen was never found despite extensive searches. Her presence in hospital records and security footage remained one of the many mysterious elements of the case. Some suggested she had been an angel in human form, while others pointed to her disappearance as evidence of divine orchestration. The scientific papers documenting the case filled entire volumes. Blood samples, tissue analysis, and genetic studies provided irrefutable evidence of the complete transfer of disease from Tommy to Father Michael. Yet the mechanism of transfer remained inexplicable by any known medical principle. "We have proof that it happened," Dr. Martinez wrote in her concluding research paper. "What we lack is the framework to explain how it was possible." Tommy's ongoing connection to the spiritual realm fascinated both religious and scientific investigators. His descriptions of angelic presence remained consistent, and his insights often carried wisdom far beyond his years. "The angels say that love is the strongest force in the universe," he explained to a group of researchers. "Father Michael proved it by choosing to take my place." The impact on St. Mary's Hospital itself was profound. The institution became a center for studying the integration of spiritual and medical care. Medical schools added courses examining the Thompson case and its implications for patient treatment. Father Michael's final letters, released on the first anniversary of his sacrifice, revealed the depth of his understanding of what was to come. "Love is always a choice," he had written, "and sometimes the greatest expression of that choice is to take another's burden upon yourself." The legacy of Room 304 extended far beyond its walls. The documented miracle challenged both religious and scientific communities to expand their understanding of reality. It sparked a global conversation about the nature of healing and the power of sacrificial love. Sarah often visited the hospital chapel where her crisis of faith had led to renewed hope. "Father Michael didn't just save Tommy's life," she reflected. "He showed us that miracles still happen, that love can literally transform reality." As another year began at St. Mary's, new patients filled its rooms, each bringing their own hopes and fears. But Room 304 remained special, a testament to the night when divine love manifested in the modern world, leaving evidence that even the most skeptical couldn't deny. Tommy, healthy and vibrant, continued to grow, carrying within him the story of a miracle that would inspire generations. The angels, he said, still watched over the hospital, waiting for others willing to make the choice that Father Michael had made. The Thompson case became required study in medical schools and seminaries alike, challenging future generations to consider the possibility that science and faith were not opposing forces, but complementary paths to understanding the deepest mysteries of existence. Father Michael Thompson's sacrifice had created a legacy that transcended religious and scientific boundaries, proving that in an age of technological marvels and medical advances, the greatest power still resided in the simple yet profound choice to love without limits. Have you witnessed the extraordinary events in Room 304? Share your thoughts on this powerful story of sacrifice, faith, and the unexplainable miracle that changed St. Mary's Hospital forever. What moment touched your heart the most? Let us know in the comments below.